All right, guys, we're live with Matty, Marc, Sid, and JD. And this session is all about how we are moving towards regulations. Obviously, there's been so much that the market activity has been, rushing tremendously towards a bullish sentiment, and everyone around the world, the regulators, the FATF, the OECD, the SEC, everyone's got, even RBI in India, everyone's got their, you know. Everyone's active basically to making sure that nothing goes wrong in the ecosystem again. It's a good thing from our side as well, because the last bull run there were some suspicious activities which led to the bearish sentiment as well, and we wouldn't want that. No one would want that. And although the whole ethos behind blockchain is complete decentralization, and the whole reason of its inception was the way that real markets are regulated, the traditional markets are regulated. So it's a fight between what the society wants, what democratic people want together, and DAOs and blockchains really govern that. The new forms of DeFi has really inculcated that the power rests with everyone as well. The total value lock now just it is just going off the roof, and it's going to keep continuing. This is just the beginning. The DeFi summers are not here to end. It's going to last for a lot longer than we all thought of. So moving on, I would like all the people that are here. Thank you, Jaideep, Siddharth, Matty, and Marc, to be here and talk about regulations and give a little perspective to all the audiences that are watching right now and who will watch later on how the regulations will pan out to be, especially in the Asian markets where there's so much activity going on. India has seen such a surge. The whole country's on fire in terms of crypto, I think, and it's more to follow. So, what do you guys think? And I would have JD, who's the expert on law and regulation, coming from Nishith Desai and Associates, to basically hold this panel. I'm going to go off stage. I'm going to leave it to JD, and everyone, if everyone can introduce themselves before they can get into the topic, and JD could lead the way on understanding from everyone on how they are seeing the regulations in their countries, and how they are, if they're everyone's acting on a global domicile. So everyone's perspective and actions that are doing in business in terms of Matty as well in quantum, and in terms of Siddharth as well in CREBACO, and even Marc in INATBA. So we need to see how we can learn from everyone and what is in store for Asia, especially India as well, when we look at things right now. So over to you, JD, and I'm going to go backstage.
Sure. So I wasn't really primed to be a mod, so I'll just try and keep it as a free-flowing conversation. But I can start. Essentially, we are in the middle of a wait-and-watch game as far as India is concerned. I'll focus on India because that's the jurisdiction I know best. And as of now, there's no specific legislation in India around crypto. As some people know, there was a Reserve Bank of India restriction preventing banks and financial institutions from facilitating buying and selling of crypto in 2018. But in 2020, the Supreme Court actually set that aside. In other words, it nullified it. And that actually paved the way for the industry to revive again. In other words, the INR, that is Indian rupee to crypto ecosystem, started again. So it's been over a year now, and according to reports, there are over, I think, $1 billion or more held on exchanges, and around, um, I think, around 7 million plus users, if I'm not wrong, though there are no confirmed statistics. But the Indian crypto ecosystem has picked up, but there is a lack of regulatory clarity as of now. There are, of course, existing laws which apply to various activities. You have criminal laws, you have other kinds of laws which apply by interpretation, but you don't have a specific legislation or specific amendments in legislation to clarify their interpretation, or rather, their interpretation has not been clarified in the crypto context. So it's up to lawyers like us to kind of interpret and advise based on the existing law. As of now, the status quo is not highly restrictive because there is no severe restriction after the Supreme Court judgment. But the hanging sword is this news about a potential legislation which may ban um, even the holding of crypto in India. So that is the elephant in the room, and we'll have to see how that plays out. I was just talking backstage to the panelists that it really depends on how people make their voices heard to the lawmakers, as to the fact that there have to be reasonable restrictions under our constitution and not overtly drastic restrictions. So with that note, maybe we can go in turn, starting with Marc, Matty, and Siddharth, just going alphabetically. For your thoughts on APAC crypto regulation, you can focus on the jurisdictions you know best, and happy to take it from there.
Thank you, JD. So it's a fascinating topic. We spent a lot of time at INATBA, which is a trade association for the DLT and blockchain industry, working with regulators and governments around the world to represent our members. And the most detailed piece of work we've done so far has been on something called MiCA, which is the Market in Crypto Assets Proposed Regulation in Europe. And this is quite significant, certainly in Europe, because it's the first time that there might be legal certainty created for a group of 30 countries. And what that will do, if it moves through, is it will provide a framework for both the treatment of crypto assets, but also the treatment of crypto asset service providers. And I'll come on to that in a little more detail in just a moment, because I also want to mention a second piece of regulation that is passing through the European Parliament at the same time. And this is to do with something that they call the DLT pilot regime. And that's a very long word for what is effectively a sandbox. And the concept behind this is that the regulators wish to create an environment where blockchain applications can be spun up inside of a sandbox to test against the regular mechanics of financial applications in what we might refer to as grown-up financial markets. So we're seeing these two pieces of proposed regulations, one that gives legal certainty, gives a framework to crypto assets and crypto asset service providers, and the second that provides ostensibly a sandbox for the development of blockchain-based applications for main financial markets. Now, it sounds great, but the sailing is not plain, as we say in England, because undoubtedly with 170 pages of proposed detailed legal regulation that took 18 months to create, there are some glaring holes and some rooms for potential improvements. And the glaring holes, I think, are indicative of the difference between the approach regulators are adopting in this new marketplace and the pace at which the marketplace works. And this is something worth dwelling on just for a little bit. So the two pieces of regulation I mentioned in Europe were very well written and very well thought through by and large, but they took between 12 to 18 months to draft before they got passed by the public servants into Parliament for debate. And end to end, the process is probably likely going to take 2 years. Now, for those of us that operate in this market, a lot happens in 2 years, right? In 2 years, NFTs have been born, have risen to prominence, have gone from a few tens of millions to a few tens of billions in terms of value in the DeFi market. DeFi has become really well known, and yet both of these approaches and applications were not even mentioned in the draft regulation because of the time it took. And so I think, the question about what's going to happen with regulation is fascinating from my perspective, because you need to ask what the driver is. Is the driver to put regulation in place, for example, because the marketplace is now too big to ignore and the value is too big to ignore, and that drives governments to react either from a proactive or a defensive position? Proactive being maybe they want to attract some of that innovation and create employment, and so want to generate a a receptive environment through regulation and legislation, or is it defensive? They wish to protect their national markets, whether they want to keep some of their macro financial levers or push back potentially some foreign components or competitors that might be venturing into their market? Or is it because there are applications that the governments wish to exploit? Take central bank digital currencies, for example. The Bank of International Settlements, who look at about 65 central banks around the world, now estimate that at least 55 central banks are experimenting with a form of programmable money or central bank digital currencies. And in fact, in Europe, the European Investment Bank just launched its first bond, a 100 million euro bond over a 2-year period on the public blockchain. So that, that's an application that they bring in because they would like to increase efficiency, reduce costs, increase transparency, and exploit the technology. And then there are the traditional considerations that drive regulation. AML, KYC, we've seen FATF with their 16 recommendations. We've seen approaches in the US from a tax perspective. We see overtures from a tax perspective beginning to raise their heads in Europe. The OECD is doing a global body of work on taxation and crypto assets. So is that the driver? Or is it consumer protection? We spoke about the ICO boom a little earlier in the conference, and how certain projects were unfortunately perhaps not as honest as they could have been. It is consumer protection driving regulation. But I'll just finish up my initial observations by stating that for the APAC region, I think it's inevitable that regulation is coming, because regulation is coming around the world. And the region does not want to be seen as a laggard, and does not want to create risk, and does not want to be seen as uninnovative, if indeed that's a word. So on that rather dubious use of English from a British guy, let me pass the floor back to you, JR, sorry.
No, it's all good. We want to disrupt language as well as money. Matty, over to you for any thoughts on APAC regulation from your perspective, which is a money management perspective. Be good to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Matti Greenspan. I'm the founder of Quantum Economics. I'm a licensed trader in the European Union and the co-author of the book, The Financial Guide, The Complete Guide to FinTech Investing. To be perfectly clear, I mean, in quantum economics, we have about 20 analysts on our team. I might not be the best one to speak with about the APAC region specifically. We have one member from Kuala Lumpur, one member from Delhi, and one analyst from Ghana. So possibly they would be able to speak a bit more towards this region. What I'd like to do is maybe just kind of give an overview of what's happening globally. I think Marc gave a good intro as to why regulation and how. Certainly, Europe is leading the way in a very big sense, even though they are quite behind. And as Marc correctly stated, the NFT market came out of nowhere. It rose up within a few weeks from zero to billions. And therefore, regulators will never be able to entirely keep up. So what we need to do within the industry is to kind of guess and check our work, try and be as transparent as we can, and as in touch with the regulation as we can. But obviously, there will be certainly faux pas along the way. The United States is actually way behind in everything that comes with that has to do with crypto. They've spent the last 6 or 7 years with a SEC chairman, Mr. Jay Clayton, who has been working very hard to destroy crypto and destroy everything that we're building. Obviously, we can only assume that this is either to protect the financial institutions within the United States or to protect the US dollar as the global reserve currency. These are obviously assumptions. He's never came out and said something like this, though other members of Congress certainly have. They are making a headway in the United States. First of all, Jay Clayton is gone now. They have a new guy named Gary Gensler. and he is on the ball. He's quite sharp, but he's just come to office, so we really don't know how he's going to tackle crypto regulation, and we also don't know how he's going to prioritize it among the many things that are on his plate. So it could take some time even before we have any kind of clarity on what's going to happen going forward. But I would say that they are finally making progress within the United States, and we even heard from the Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell yesterday talking about central bank digital currencies, and he was saying that not only that he doesn't really understand, but actually they're on a program right now to fast track it so that they can really understand the issues. And it seems like they're getting up to speed quite quickly. In Asia, I think that they're actually ahead of the United States and behind Europe, in the fact that Europe is already legislating, but ahead of the United States, and that nobody's been working against crypto, with the exception, of course, of RBI, as Jaideep mentioned, and as we know in China, things happen according to the Chinese government. But the rest of Asia, I think, is largely agnostic, and there's a lot of room to come out and innovate in a way that's quite unique, because their governments aren't necessarily watching it as much. I mean, as Jaideep mentioned, I mean, the volumes are too low in some cases to really start paying attention. And I think one of the prime examples of that is what we just heard from IOHK in Ethiopia, where they're using their new ID system, which is built on the Cardano network, and integrating that directly into the Ethiopian education system, where student records will be able to be held on the blockchain, and they'll be able to use this large data to improve education throughout the region. Now, hopefully, obviously, this is an experiment. We'll be able to get a great, with its 5 million users right off the bat onto the Cardano network, so we'll be able to get a good stress test of their system, but also user feedback into, how useful is it, and how easy it is to interact with the system. And I think that throughout Asia, you're going to find pockets of and countries where there is great opportunity, simply because there isn't any kind of urgency for the government to crack down on it. And I think that that's where we need to focus our efforts for the most part.
Great. Siddharth, you've actually, I think, done your own thought leadership as far as India's potential way forward for regulation is concerned. Do you want to talk to the audience about that and where you see the way forward?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jaideep, and great comments by Matty and Marc. I'm heading CREBACO, which is a research, rating, and intelligence company focused on blockchain and crypto assets. So we started with an intention to regulate the industry and make it more acceptable in terms of recognition by institutional investors and government. So we have worked with a few governments already, and currently we are helping the Indian government as well for better regulations. I see. So I have interacted with a few bureaucrats and politicians and these guys. These guys, for them, the industry size, what I've observed, especially in India, for them it's not that big. If it's globally, the market size is 2.2 trillion or something right now. It's not that big yet. So they are just waiting for the industry to evolve a little further, because so one of the instances which I was sharing in the backstage as well. So I met one of the politicians, and he's like, there are just 4 to 5 exchanges in India, and just 7 million users, less than $1 billion in custody. It's too small, and for a country, Asian countries, especially India, it has layers of processes, right? There is a state government, there is central government, there are tax departments, there is Reserve Bank. And all of these, there is SEBI. All these guys have to come together and give their consents when it comes to something related to finance, something which is cross-border, right? So biggest concern with countries like India and China are risk of capital outflow. So what has been happening is people, they burn the fiat, buy the crypto, send the money off the country. It's like it's as good as so I mean, in the government's point of view, it is something like money laundering. So they don't know how to tackle it. They need to open their approach, because if they are trying to apply the traditional mechanisms to assess crypto transactions or valuations and stuff like that, it won't really work. The good thing is with Singapore, right? Singapore was one of the first Asian countries to be very liberal about the crypto. However, they initially they knew that the transactions are taking place in crypto and stuff is happening, but so they had a very different approach. They kept one eye open, one eye closed. They knew that there have been ICOs taking place from here, millions have been raised, but for them it was too small as an industry size, so they let it evolve. And so the ICO was a boom bust thing. Even DeFi, it just came and it is there. NFTs are there, like how the industry is evolving every day. So I just think that Asia is taking its own time, but once and it is, it's when you say regulated, that means there is a set body or a set framework for crypto. But when you say it's unregulated, see, you cannot ban it, right? These guys have understood that they cannot ban it outright because it won't make sense. Korea banned it, and after a week they said, it's not making sense, lift the ban, right? It in 1 week they changed their opinion about crypto. So even with my interaction with one of the politicians, he was saying that this is a table, this has an underlying asset. Where is the underlying asset in crypto? Who's Satoshi? We don't know. We need to catch hold of something if anything goes wrong. So I said, sir, with all due respect, if you want, just go ahead and ban it. And there was a 3-second silence. And I was like, how are you going to implement that ban? You don't even know who's trading. If you catch hold of somebody, he has his password in his head. You cannot take that money away from that guy, right? So he said, all right, fine, it makes sense. Show me what you've got. So we had made a proposed regulatory framework. We submitted it to them. So it's important that these countries, the Asian countries specifically, should not hurry in. It's still too small, the market size. But if they want to lead the show, they must regulate it ASAP. And I see that in 2021 end or 2022 first quarter, we'll see some really good positive regulations for crypto. Over to you, Jaideep.
Great, definitely hope so. It's obviously a dialogue, as Marc would share, being part of the trade body. And on that note, I want to come to Marc. Could you share some success stories that you've seen where maybe a government has been skeptical about crypto and the industry has been able to kind of come together, engage in a dialogue, and shape the regulation? I know that in Australia there was a self-regulatory body, and that did do some good work in helping the perception. But Marc, you touched upon it in your first comments, but if you want to go deeper in any particular jurisdiction, that will help.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question. So the first thing to say is that it is really hard to try and influence the development of regulation or legislation, because the government system is so large, is so well ingrained, particularly when you talk about finance, and they're very concerned with maintaining the integrity of the market. as well as preventing abuse and focusing on AML and KYC, which is entirely understandable. So it's a very long process, and the most efficient way that we have found to engage is through education and delivery of evidence. There's a big disconnect between the blockchain industry and how it works and how the world of government and regulators work. And the two different groups find it really hard to talk effectively with each other, because we as a blockchain industry aren't really interested in understanding how regulators go about their business. We just want them to do what we want from them, which is, to make it open, make it quick, and just get out the way and let us get on, right? And the regulators really need to go about things in a very methodical manner and don't take very kindly to, super bright and intelligent people who just don't have the time to sit down and spend 3 weeks building up an evidence base before you even write anything down. They want to write a line of code and push it out and get going, man. So this culture clash is maybe the most interesting observation I'd like to put to you. But specifically, you asked, where are there some successes? And I'd like to draw back to the two pieces of significant regulation traveling through the parliament at the moment. I'm not going to claim these as successes because the process is still ongoing, which means that the final shape of the regulation is still a long way from being known. But we have seen a significant development in both files. So the first file is the marketing crypto assets. That's the proposed regulation that will provide a harmonized way of managing crypto assets and crypto asset service providers across 30 countries in Europe. And I mentioned earlier that DeFi was completely excluded when we saw the first draft. We raised that within half a day of having read the final draft upon receiving it. And I'm very happy to say that from access to some non-public papers that we have recently seen and knowledge about some debates that will be happening in Parliament next week, we are now seeing certain provisions being made to bring decentralized finance applications into consideration within that proposed regulatory framework. And the reason why we've arrived at that point is because we've spent a lot of time as an industry bringing evidence in a way that makes it easy for the regulators to understand. And that involves lots of meetings, the provision of lots of information, and the consideration of how to package this up in a way in which regulators can easily consume it and understand it. And so we're very hopeful that the regulation, when we see it in its final form, will take into consideration decentralized finance. If we're even more successful, it might even take into consideration other applications like non-fungible tokens, NFTs. But more importantly, I believe what we will see is a process built into this regulation that allows for an iterative review over a shorter period of time, thus making it slightly easier to try and keep pace with a rapidly developing industry. The final example of where we've seen progress being made in terms of adapting a proposed regulation is in the pilot regime, which, if you remember, I described that as the sandbox environment. Now, in the first instance, the proposal would only allow established and licensed providers to apply to take part in the sandbox. And that would require them to demonstrate that they met certain criteria. And we felt that was less than a level playing field. As INATBA, on behalf of our members, we felt that limiting participation in that sandbox to those entities that were already licensed ruled out a whole bunch of innovators that could add value to a market. And we likened it, to use a telecoms analogy, a little bit like asking a company that wanted to roll out an international 5G network, so the fastest mobile network that you can, to lay copper into the ground and attach every house to copper wires before they would even be allowed to be considered to operate a 5G license. So, really two steps that were quite prohibitive. And what we've seen very recently, again in some draft non-public papers, is that this pilot regime will now be opened up to new market entrants as well as the established licensed providers. So there are two examples to answer your question directly, but I think the result of that is really brought to bear through some detailed engagement, some education, and the provision of really quite solid evidence in written form. It's not something that happens through one conference or through one corridor conversation with 2 or 3 ministers. Sadly, it takes months and it takes the industry to come together to bring that evidence to bear and to put forward a really compelling case for these changes to be considered and ultimately maybe to be brought into law. And it's not very easy. I'll let you into a bit of a secret, Jaideep, before I pass the floor back to you. I'm only actually 18 years old. I just look like this. I look the way I do because of the sheer volume of work that we've had to put in over the last 16 months in educating people.
We believe.
Amazing. No, that's really insightful, including the last piece of information. But Matty, moving on to you. I mean, it seems like you are an example of what Marc mentioned, that you just want to get down to either trading or coding, and regulations are in the way. So you want to share any instances where you found that you want to do something, maybe it's something innovative, you want to create a new kind of product, but you found that regulations are in the way, and how you dealt with that kind of thing, if at all.
Yeah, well, my philosophy is, I mean, I'm a licensed trader. Honestly, I have a trading license from the Securities and Exchange Commission in Cyprus, and I can certainly say that I've been witness, as many of you know. I was the senior market analyst of eToro for many years, and I think great success was there from eToro's side and in educating the regulators, because when it first started popping in 2017, SciSec actually came to us and they said, okay, what are you guys doing? And we're like, okay, here, let us show you. And we sat them down in a room and over several sessions and explained to them, okay, what are cryptocurrencies? What is blockchain? How is this transparent? And we explained to them all of the benefits, of course, from the regulation side. And with that, they were extremely willing to allow us to continue operation and buying and selling digital assets, and even allowing withdrawals of crypto to select customers, depending, of course, on their profile and things like that. And I thought it was quite interesting to find them, a small country is so open-minded, especially when you think about the ramifications of passporting, meaning that one country in Europe, when they decide something, every country kind of has to go along with them. So I thought that was quite interesting. I mean, for me, regulation is, or regulators are both good friends and enemies at the same time, and that's just it just kind of how it is as a money manager. You're always thinking about the ramifications of your actions and how things, and that's beyond the scope of cryptocurrencies. But when we get into cryptocurrencies, we need to understand that we can't really have too high expectations. It's not like, they're not going to just tear down the walls and say, okay, you know what, because it's crypto, so just go for it, right? That's not going to happen. And what we're talking about here is programmable money, which can have more applications than the human mind can really imagine. And therefore, we can't really expect a regulator to come in and set forth any kind of guidelines that's going to apply to all of them. Like Marc said, I mean, they had to, on the last minute come in and say DeFi. Wait, but DeFi. But I'm sure that the NFT market came in right behind that, and they're like, oh crap, and just throw all the papers in the air, right? What are you gonna do, right? So I think that as people who operate within the space, we need to be cognizant of things like precedent, and think, okay, what am I doing here actually, and what old world application does this most resemble, right? And a bit of kind of open-minded thinking to kind of try and apply. And this is obviously the work of lawyers more than anybody else. And of course, I rely on my lawyer for that. I come to him and say, okay, this is what I want to do. Can we do it? And then he says, okay, well, you might want to do this and this specifically as far as your marketing is concerned, or things like that. He'll give me guidance as to how I can be the most or as regulatory compliant as possible, because 100% regulatory compliance in a field where everybody's constantly innovating will simply be impossible. And I don't think there will ever be a point where it will suddenly be possible. We just need to continue to have this mindset going forward.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's always a fine line. Abhimanyu, how much time do we have? Maybe I'll just hand it over.
Yeah,
I think we're over by 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, JD. And no, it's been
Siddharth,
actually
I'll
really
give Siddharth just half a minute, because
absolutely.
he's done.
Absolutely.
But Siddharth, if you want to just maybe in half a minute or a minute summarize your proposals for regulation for India, and then we can wind up.
Yes, absolutely. I'll try to do that in 30 seconds. What I want to say is, the approach of many governments have been wrong. They want to regulate something which was made so that it cannot get under the purview of regulations, right? Bitcoin is regulated by its own protocol, so you cannot, if you think that you want to, do anything with it, you can't technically do it. All you can do is regulate the people who use Bitcoin, right? So that's my thing. The government must understand that Bitcoin is here to stay with or without you. I was just chatting with a friend, and it came across. It's you cannot stop it, right? If it would have, if anybody could have stopped it, it would have happened, right? So it's here to stay. Don't really worry about regulations. Keep building, keep trading. The bigger you make the ecosystem, the Metcalfe's law will keep, the bigger the more users, the more acceptabilities. It's unstoppable. So don't worry about regulations. Just keep hodling.
Become too big to fail, I think is the takeaway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got it right.
On that happy note, I'll hand it over to Abhimanyu, sir.